11-year-old forced into adult world. Her mother's courageous battle will restore your faith in humanity. The autumn light filtered through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Sarah Miller, a woman in her late 30s with tired eyes and a kind smile that didn't quite reach them anymore, watched her 11-year-old daughter, Emily, limp slightly as she walked to the refrigerator. "Your leg bothering you again, honey?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice light. Emily, a slender girl with a cascade of dark hair that often hid her face, shrugged. "It's nothing, Mom. Just a little sore." It had been just a little sore for weeks now. It started subtly, a barely perceptible hesitation in Emily's gait, but it had gradually worsened. Sarah had taken her to the doctor, who had found nothing physically wrong. Growing pains, he'd suggested, but Sarah wasn't convinced. This wasn't the only change she'd noticed in Emily. Her once cheerful daughter had become increasingly withdrawn, spending hours in her room with the door closed. She, who used to bound out of bed, now slept late, often missing breakfast. Her grades, usually excellent, had started to slip. Their home, a modest two-story house in the quiet town of Maplewood, Ohio, had always been filled with laughter and the aroma of Sarah's baking. Maplewood was a typical Midwestern town, with a mix of families, a strong sense of community, and a slower pace of life than the big cities. Sarah, a single mother since Emily's father had left years ago, worked as a librarian at the local branch. She cherished her quiet life with Emily, their evenings spent reading together or watching old movies. But lately, as silence had settled over their home, a silence punctuated by Emily's evasive answers and Sarah's growing unease. "Are you sure you're okay, Em?" Sarah pressed gently, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "You can tell me anything, you know." Emily grabbed a yogurt from the fridge and slammed the door shut, a little harder than necessary. "I'm fine, Mom. Just tired." She turned to leave, her back to Sarah. Sarah noticed a small, silver bracelet on Emily's wrist, one she'd never seen before. It looked new, expensive. "Where did you get that bracelet, Emily?" Emily froze, her hand instinctively going to her wrist. "Oh, this? A friend gave it to me." "Which friend?" Emily hesitated. "Just a friend from school." Sarah knew Emily was lying. She could see it in the way she avoided her eyes, in the slight tremor in her voice. But she also knew that pushing too hard would only make Emily retreat further. "Okay, honey," Sarah said, forcing a smile. "Just be careful, okay? And try to get some rest." Emily nodded and hurried out of the kitchen, leaving Sarah alone with her coffee and her growing worries. Something was going on with her daughter, something she was hiding, and Sarah was determined to find out what it was. The following weeks saw a deepening of the rift between Sarah and Emily. The small, unexplained changes in Emily's behavior continued, accumulating like tiny cracks in a dam, threatening to break it wide open. The limping persisted, despite Emily's insistence that it was nothing. Sarah noticed that Emily was often gone in the evenings, claiming to be at a friend's house or at the library. But when Sarah occasionally called the parents of Emily's friends, they would say they hadn't seen her. The library, Sarah knew from her own work schedule, closed earlier than Emily usually returned home. One afternoon, while Emily was supposedly at a friend's house, Sarah decided to tidy up Emily's room. She wasn't snooping, she told herself, just organizing. But as she straightened the piles of clothes on Emily's bed, she noticed a small, velvet pouch tucked under a pillow. Curiosity overriding her hesitation, she opened it. Inside were a few crumpled dollar bills, more money than Emily's allowance would account for, and a receipt from a local clothing store for a dress Sarah had never seen. The dress was stylish, a bit too grown-up for an 11-year-old, in Sarah's opinion. Sarah felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. Where was Emily getting this money? And why was she buying clothes without telling her? That evening, when Emily returned home, Sarah confronted her. "Emily, I found this in your room," she said, holding up the pouch and the receipt. "Can you explain this?" Emily's face paled. She stammered, "I found the money. And the dress was on sale. I was going to surprise you." The lies were flimsy, transparent. Sarah's heart ached at the obvious deception. "Emily, please," Sarah said, her voice pleading. "Just tell me the truth. What's going on?" Emily burst into tears. "Nothing's going on, Mom. I don't want to talk about it." She ran to her room and slammed the door, leaving Sarah standing there, feeling helpless and more worried than ever. She considered calling Emily's father, but he lived several states away and had minimal contact with them. She felt utterly alone in her concern. The next day, Sarah decided to talk to Emily's teacher, Mrs. Davis. Perhaps she had noticed something, some clue to Emily's changed behavior. Mrs. Davis, a kind, observant woman, listened patiently to Sarah's concerns. Emily is a bright girl, she said, but she has seemed distracted lately. She's been daydreaming in class, and her grades have slipped. I haven't seen anything overtly concerning, but I'll keep a closer eye on her. The conversation offered Sarah little comfort. It confirmed her suspicions that something was wrong, but it didn't provide any answers. One Sunday morning, Emily announced that she was going to Sunday school at the local church. Sarah, while not particularly religious herself, had always encouraged Emily to attend, believing it provided a sense of community and moral guidance. "That's good, honey," Sarah said. "Have fun." But as Emily left, a nagging doubt lingered in Sarah's mind. Emily had been increasingly reluctant to attend Sunday school in recent weeks, often making excuses to stay home. Something felt off. After Emily had been gone for a couple of hours, Sarah decided to call Mrs. Peterson, the Sunday school teacher. She just wanted to check in, to see how Emily was doing. "Hello, Mrs. Peterson. This is Sarah Miller, Emily's mother." "Oh, hello, Sarah," Mrs. Peterson said. "How are you?" "I'm fine, thank you. I was just wondering how Emily is doing in Sunday school today." There was a pause. Emily isn't here today, Sarah. She hasn't been to Sunday school in several weeks." Sarah's heart sank. The lie was confirmed. Emily wasn't at Sunday school, and she hadn't been for weeks. Where was she? What was she doing? When Emily returned home that afternoon, Sarah was waiting for her. "Emily," Sarah said, her voice firm but controlled. "I spoke to Mrs. Peterson. She said you haven't been to Sunday school in weeks. Where have you been?" Emily's face crumpled. She knew she'd been caught. I lied," she mumbled, avoiding Sarah's gaze. "I know you lied, Emily," Sarah said. "But why? Where have you been going?" Emily hesitated, then, in a rush of words, confessed. She hadn't been going to Sunday school. She'd been going to dance classes. Sarah was initially relieved. Dance classes? That didn't seem so bad. But then Emily continued, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not just regular dance classes, Mom. It's different." She explained that she'd met a group of older girls who were involved in a kind of performance group. They danced and sang at local events, private parties, even some clubs. They were paid for their performances. Sarah was stunned. This was far more serious than she had imagined. An 11-year-old girl, performing in clubs. It was dangerous, inappropriate, and completely unacceptable. "Who are these girls, Emily?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Who is in charge of this group?" Emily hesitated again. It's Aunt Carol," she said, her voice barely audible. Aunt Carol. The name sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Carol was Sarah's older sister, and their relationship had always been strained, to say the least. Carol was flamboyant, impulsive, and in Sarah's opinion, morally ambiguous. She had a history of questionable choices and a knack for manipulating people to get what she wanted. Carol lived on the other side of town, in a more upscale neighborhood. She had always been envious of Sarah's stable, if modest, life. She saw Sarah as boring, overly cautious, and lacking in ambition. Sarah, in turn, saw Carol as reckless, irresponsible, and a bad influence. They rarely saw each other, their interactions limited to obligatory family gatherings. Sarah had always tried to keep Emily away from Carol, fearing her influence. But now, it seemed, Carol had found a way to infiltrate their lives. Carol's son, Mark, was another source of concern. He was in his early 20s, unemployed, and had a reputation for getting into trouble. Sarah had heard rumors of petty theft, drug use, and generally unsavory behavior. She had always been careful to keep Emily away from him. The thought of Emily being involved with Carol and, potentially, Mark, filled Sarah with dread. She knew she had to act quickly to protect her daughter from what she saw as a dangerous and exploitative situation. But how? She couldn't simply forbid Emily from seeing Carol. Emily was already secretive and rebellious. A direct confrontation might push her further away, deeper into Carol's influence. Sarah decided to pay Carol a visit. She needed to understand what was happening, to assess the situation firsthand. She needed to find a way to get her daughter back. She drove to Carol's house the next day, her heart pounding with anxiety. Carol's house was a stark contrast to Sarah's modest home. It was larger, more modern, with a meticulously manicured lawn and an expensive car parked in the driveway. Carol answered the door, her face a mask of surprise, quickly replaced by a forced smile. She was dressed in flashy clothes, her makeup heavy, her jewelry ostentatious. "Sarah, what a surprise," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What brings you here?" "I need to talk to you, Carol," Sarah said, her voice firm. "It's about Emily." Carol's smile faltered slightly. "Emily? What about Emily?" "I know about the dance group," Sarah said, cutting to the chase. "I know she's been performing with you." Carol's eyes narrowed. "And what if she is?" "She's got talent, Sarah. She's a natural." "She's 11 years old, Carol," Sarah exclaimed. "She shouldn't be performing in clubs and private parties. It's dangerous." Carol waved her hand dismissively. "Don't be so dramatic, Sarah. It's perfectly safe. I'm always there, looking after her." "You're exploiting her, Carol," Sarah said, her voice rising. "You're using her to make money." Carol's face hardened. "I'm giving her opportunities, Sarah. Something you could never do." The conversation quickly deteriorated into a heated argument, with Carol denying any wrongdoing and Sarah accusing her of endangering Emily. The underlying tension and resentment that had simmered between them for years finally boiled over. This part is interspersed with the ongoing narrative, offering glimpses into Emily's perspective without fully revealing the extent of her involvement. Glimpse 1. The music pulsed through Emily's body, a driving beat that made her heart race. The stage lights were hot on her face, blurring the faces in the audience. She moved with a confidence she never felt in her everyday life, her body fluid and graceful. The limp in her leg, a constant reminder of her awkwardness in school, disappeared when she danced. She wore a costume that sparkled under the lights, a dress that made her feel older, more glamorous. She caught a glimpse of Aunt Carol in the wings, smiling and nodding encouragingly. For a few precious minutes, Emily wasn't the shy, awkward girl who was bullied at school. She was a star, a performer, a different person entirely. The applause at the end of the song was intoxicating, a validation she craved. Glimpse 2. Emily sat in a dimly lit room, surrounded by older girls. They were applying makeup, their faces reflected in cracked mirrors. The air was thick with the scent of hairspray and perfume. One of the girls, a teenager named Tanya, handed Emily a small glass of something bubbly. "Here, drink this. It'll calm your nerves." Emily hesitated. She knew she shouldn't drink alcohol, but she didn't want to appear childish. She took a small sip, the liquid burning her throat. Tanya winked. "See? Not so bad. Just relax and have fun." Emily forced a smile, but a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. She was starting to feel like she was in over her head. Glimpse 3. Emily changed the price, removing the price tag from the dress, and exchanged it to other price tag. Glimpse 4. Emily stood backstage, waiting for her cue. She could hear the murmur of the audience, the clinking of glasses, the occasional raucous laugh. This wasn't a school talent show, it was a private party, held in a large, opulent house. A man, older and slightly drunk, approached her. He was wearing an expensive suit, and his eyes lingered on her a little too long. "You're a very talented young lady," he said, his voice slurred. He reached out to touch her arm, but Aunt Carol appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. "She's with me," Carol said, her voice sharp. She steered the man away, her smile never faltering. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. She was grateful for Carol's intervention, but the incident left her feeling shaken and vulnerable. She was beginning to understand the risks of this secret life. She started to ask herself, why did I exchange the price tag? After the explosive argument with Carol, Sarah returned home, her mind reeling. She knew she had to talk to Emily again, to try to get the full story, to make her understand the dangers she was facing. Emily was in her room, the door closed. Sarah knocked gently. Emily, can I come in? There was a muffled response, and Sarah opened the door. Emily was sitting on her bed, her face buried in her hands. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. I heard you and Aunt Carol arguing, she said, her voice trembling. What's going on, Mom? Sarah sat down on the bed beside her daughter and took a deep breath. Emily, I know you've been lying to me, she said, her voice soft but firm. I know about the dance group, about the performances. I know Aunt Carol is involved. Emily didn't deny it this time. She simply nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Mom, she sobbed. I didn't mean to lie. I wanted to be good at something. I wanted to feel special. Sarah pulled Emily into a hug, her heart aching for her daughter. Oh, honey, she said. You are special. You don't need to do this to prove anything. She let Emily cry for a while, holding her close. Then, she gently asked, tell me everything, Emily. Tell me about the performances, about Aunt Carol, about everything. Emily, hesitantly at first, began to talk. She described the excitement of performing, the thrill of the applause, the feeling of belonging she found with the other girls. She also talked about the pressure, the long hours, the uncomfortable situations she sometimes found herself in. She confessed that she had been skipping school to attend rehearsals and performances. She admitted that she had taken money from Carol, money she knew was earned through these performances. She revealed that she had been exchanging price tags, feeling pressure to appear glamorous and keep up with the older girls. The more Emily talked, the more Sarah's fears were confirmed. This wasn't just a harmless after-school activity. This was exploitation, pure and simple. And Carol was at the center of it. Emily, Sarah said, her voice filled with concern, this is dangerous. You're too young to be involved in this kind of thing. And Carol is taking advantage of you. Emily looked down at her hands. But she's been so nice to me, Mom, she said. She says I have a gift. She says I can be a star. She's manipulating you, Emily, Sarah said. She's using your talent for her own gain. And she's putting you in harm's way. The conversation was long and difficult. Emily was defensive at first, clinging to the illusion of glamour and excitement that Carol had created. But gradually, as Sarah patiently explained the risks, as she expressed her love and concern, Emily began to see the truth. The next day, Carol called Sarah. Her voice was icy. I heard you had a little chat with Emily, she said. Yes, I did, Sarah replied, her voice steady. And I told her she's not to be involved in your dance group anymore. You have no right to do that, Carol snapped. Emily is my niece. I'm looking out for her best interests. Her best interests, Sarah retorted, by putting her in dangerous situations, by encouraging her to lie and skip school. That's not looking out for her best interests, Carol. That's exploitation. You're just jealous, Sarah, Carol said, her voice dripping with venom. You're jealous because Emily has talent, because she has a chance to be something more than it, a librarian in a small town. This isn't about me, Carol, Sarah said. This is about Emily's safety and well-being. I have a solution, Carol said, her tone shifting, becoming smoother, more persuasive. A way to make everyone happy. Sarah was immediately suspicious. What solution? Mark has been very impressed with Emily, Carol said. He thinks she's very talented. He's been talking about taking her under his wing, helping her with her career. Sarah felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. What are you suggesting, Carol? I'm suggesting a partnership, Carol said. A family partnership. Mark and Emily. They could be a great team. He could manage her, guide her, protect her. Sarah realized with horror what Carol was proposing. You're talking about marriage, aren't you? She said, her voice trembling. You're suggesting that my 11-year-old daughter marry your son. Carol didn't deny it. It's a practical solution, Sarah, she said. It would give Emily stability, a future, and it would keep everything in the family. Sarah was speechless. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. This was beyond anything she had imagined. You're insane, Carol, she finally said, her voice shaking with anger. Absolutely insane. Emily is not marrying anyone, especially not Mark. This conversation is over. She hung up the phone, her hands shaking. Carol's manipulative nature had reached a new low. This wasn't just about exploiting Emily's talent, it was about controlling her life, about using her to secure a future for her own troubled son. Sarah knew she had to act quickly. She had to protect Emily from Carol and Mark, and she had to find a way to end this nightmare once and for all. Despite Sarah's furious rejection over the phone, Carol wasn't deterred. The following evening, she arrived at Sarah's house and announced, with Mark in tow. Mark looked even more disreputable than Sarah remembered, his eyes bloodshot, his clothes rumpled. "Sarah, we need to talk," Carol said, pushing her way into the house. "We're here to make a formal proposal." Emily, who had been in the kitchen, came into the living room, her eyes wide with fear. "Mom, what's going on?" she whispered. Sarah put a protective arm around Emily. "It's okay, honey," she said, though her voice trembled with barely suppressed anger. "Just go to your room." Emily hesitated, then obeyed, casting worried glances back at her mother. Carol, ignoring Emily's presence, launched into her prepared speech. "Sarah, we've thought this through, and we believe this is the best solution for everyone. Mark is very fond of Emily, and he has connections in the entertainment industry. He can help her develop her talent, guide her career." Mark, who had been silent until now, spoke up, his voice slurred. "Yeah, she's a real star, your daughter. We could make her famous." Sarah stared at them, incredulous. "You're serious, aren't you?" she said. "You actually think I would allow my 11-year-old daughter to marry your son, a man with issues?" Carol bristled. "Mark is a good man, Sarah. He just needs a chance. And Emily needs someone to look after her, someone who understands her talent." "She has me to look after her," Sarah said, her voice rising. "And she doesn't need a career at 11 years old. She needs to be a child, to go to school, to be safe." "You're holding her back, Sarah," Carol said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You're stifling her potential." "I'm protecting her," Sarah retorted. "From you, from him, from this insane scheme." Mark stepped forward, his eyes narrowed. "You can't stop us, you know," he said, his voice menacing. "Emily wants this. She told me so." Sarah turned to where Emily had been standing, but she was gone. She had slipped back into her room, unable to bear the confrontation. "Emily doesn't want this," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "She's a child. She's being manipulated by you. We're offering her a future, Sarah," Carol said, her voice smooth again, trying a different tactic. "A future of fame, fortune, success. Don't you want that for your daughter?" "I want her to be happy and safe," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "And that's not something you can offer her." She stood up, her body trembling with rage. "Get out of my house," she said, her voice low but firm. "Get out, and don't ever come back. If you try to contact Emily again, I will go to the police." Carol and Mark exchanged a look. They could see that Sarah was serious, that she wouldn't be swayed. "You'll regret this, Sarah," Carol said, her voice filled with spite. "You're making a big mistake." They turned and left, slamming the door behind them. Sarah stood there for a moment, her body shaking. Then, she went to Emily's room. She found Emily curled up on her bed, crying. Sarah sat down beside her and held her close. "It's okay, honey," she said, stroking Emily's hair. "It's over. They're gone. I won't let them hurt you." Emily clung to her mother, her sobs slowly subsiding. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I didn't know. I didn't want this." "I know, honey," Sarah said. "I know." The marriage proposal, as outrageous as it was, had finally broken through Emily's denial. She had seen the true nature of Carol and Mark, the extent of their manipulation, and she had realized that her mother was her only true protector. After the shocking confrontation with Carol and Mark, Sarah knew she needed concrete evidence to protect Emily. She couldn't simply rely on Emily's word. She needed proof of Carol's exploitative practices, something she could use to stop her, perhaps even involve the authorities if necessary. She started by researching online. She looked up local ordinances regarding child performers, employment laws, and any regulations governing the entertainment industry in their area. She found a wealth of information, confirming her suspicions that Carol was violating numerous laws. Next, Sarah decided to talk to some of Emily's friends, the ones she had initially claimed to be visiting when she was secretly going to rehearsals and performances. She approached them cautiously, explaining that she was worried about Emily and needed their help. One of the girls, a classmate named Jessica, was hesitant at first but eventually opened up. She confirmed that Emily had been spending a lot of time with Carol and a group of older girls. She described the performances as being kind of weird, with Emily often dressed in revealing outfits and performing in places that didn't seem appropriate for children. Jessica also mentioned that Emily had seemed increasingly stressed and withdrawn, often complaining about being tired and having to keep secrets from her mother. This information, while painful to hear, strengthened Sarah's resolve. Sarah then decided to take a more direct approach. She knew where Carol's dance group held their rehearsals, a small, run-down studio on the outskirts of town. She decided to go there, unannounced, to observe what was happening firsthand. She waited until the evening, when she knew a rehearsal was scheduled. She parked her car a block away from the studio and walked the rest of the way, keeping to the shadows. She found a window at the back of the building that offered a view of the interior. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. Emily, along with several other girls, some of whom looked even younger than her, were rehearsing a dance routine. The choreography was suggestive, the costumes revealing, and the atmosphere was anything but professional. Carol was there, directing the girls, her voice harsh and demanding. Mark was also present, lounging in a corner, watching the girls with a leering expression. Sarah felt a surge of anger and disgust. She wanted to barge in, to grab Emily and take her away from this toxic environment. But she knew that would only escalate the situation. She needed to be strategic. She took out her phone and recorded a video of the rehearsal, capturing the inappropriate choreography, the revealing costumes, and Carol's and Mark's presence. This, she knew, was the evidence she needed. Armed with the video evidence and the information she had gathered, Sarah decided it was time for a final confrontation with Carol. This time, however, she wouldn't be alone. She contacted a lawyer, a friend from her book club who specialized in family law. The lawyer, Mrs. Thompson, listened to Sarah's story, reviewed the evidence, and agreed that Carol's actions were illegal and exploitative. She advised Sarah to file a restraining order against Carol and Mark, preventing them from having any contact with Emily. She also suggested reporting Carol to the Child Protective Services. With Mrs. Thompson's help, Sarah prepared the necessary paperwork. Then, she arranged a meeting with Carol, ostensibly to discuss the situation one last time. She insisted that the meeting take place at Mrs. Thompson's office. Carol, suspecting nothing, agreed. She arrived at the office, dressed in her usual flashy attire, a smug expression on her face. She was clearly expecting to intimidate Sarah into submission. She was in for a rude awakening. Sarah, accompanied by Mrs. Thompson, laid out the evidence, the video of the rehearsal, the statements from Emily's friends, the research on child labor laws. She presented Carol with the restraining order, informing her that any further contact with Emily would result in legal consequences. Carol's face went through a series of transformations, from shock to disbelief to outrage. She denied everything, claiming that Sarah was exaggerating, that she was just trying to help Emily. But Mrs. Thompson, with her calm, professional demeanor, systematically dismantled Carol's arguments. She pointed out the legal violations, the potential harm to Emily, and the consequences Carol would face if she continued her behavior. Mark, who had accompanied Carol, tried to intervene, his voice raised in anger. But Mrs. Thompson quickly shut him down, informing him that he was also named in the restraining order. Faced with the undeniable evidence and the threat of legal action, Carol's bravado finally crumbled. She realized she had been cornered. Her dreams of exploiting Emily's talent, of using her to secure a better future for herself and Mark, were shattered. The meeting ended with Carol and Mark being escorted out of the office, their faces filled with a mixture of anger and defeat. Sarah, though emotionally drained, felt a sense of relief. She had done what she needed to do to protect her daughter. That evening, Sarah and Emily had another long talk. Emily, now fully aware of Carol's manipulation, expressed her gratitude to her mother. She apologized for the lies, for the secrecy, for the pain she had caused. Sarah held her daughter close, reassuring her that she was loved, that she was safe, and that they would get through this together. The days and weeks following the confrontation with Carol were a time of healing and rebuilding for Sarah and Emily. The emotional wounds inflicted by Carol's manipulation and Emily's secrecy wouldn't disappear overnight, but a sense of peace had returned to their home. Sarah made sure Emily understood that she wasn't angry with her, that she recognized she was a victim in the situation. She emphasized that Emily's talent was a gift, but that it needed to be nurtured in a safe and healthy environment. They started attending therapy sessions together, a suggestion from Mrs. Thompson. The therapist helped them work through their feelings of anger, betrayal, and guilt. Emily learned to understand the dangers she had faced and to recognize the signs of manipulation. Sarah learned to be more open and communicative with Emily, creating a space where she felt safe to share her feelings and concerns. Emily stopped dancing altogether for a while, focusing on her schoolwork and rebuilding her friendships. She reconnected with Jessica and other friends, apologizing for her distance and secrecy. Her friends, understanding and supportive, welcomed her back. Sarah, too, made changes. She realized that she had been so focused on providing for Emily that she had neglected to pay attention to her emotional needs. She started spending more quality time with Emily, rediscovering their shared interests, like reading and watching old movies. They started cooking together, experimenting with new recipes, filling their home with the comforting aroma of home-baked goods. The limp that had plagued Emily for so long gradually disappeared. It had been, as the doctor suspected, a psychosomatic manifestation of her stress and anxiety. As the emotional burden lifted, her body healed. One evening, as they were sitting together reading, Emily spoke up. "Mom," she said, "I think I want to dance again." Sarah looked up, surprised but not disapproving. "Are you sure, honey?" "Yeah," Emily said, "but not like before. I want to take real classes at the community center. Jessica goes there, and she says it's good." Sarah smiled. "That sounds wonderful, Em," she said. "I'm proud of you." Life for Sarah and Emily settled into a new normal. Emily thrived in her dance classes at the community center, her natural talent blossoming in a supportive and healthy environment. She made new friends, girls who shared her passion for dance but also understood the importance of balance and safety. Sarah continued to be vigilant, ensuring that Emily was never again put in a vulnerable position. She stayed involved in Emily's activities, getting to know her teachers and friends' parents. She created an open line of communication with Emily, encouraging her to share anything that made her feel uncomfortable or unsafe. The restraining order against Carol and Mark remained in effect. Sarah heard through the grapevine that Carol had moved to another state, presumably to escape the legal ramifications of her actions. Mark, she heard, was still struggling with his personal demons. Sarah felt a pang of sadness for them, but she knew she had made the right decision to protect her daughter. Years later, Emily, now a confident and accomplished young woman, was preparing to go to college. She had chosen a school with a strong dance program, but she was also interested in pursuing a degree in child psychology. She had learned from her own experiences, and she wanted to help other young people who had faced similar challenges. One evening, as they were packing Emily's belongings, Sarah came across the small, silver bracelet that Emily had worn when she was involved with Carol. She held it up, examining it closely. "Do you still want this?" she asked. Emily looked at the bracelet, her expression thoughtful. "No, Mom," she said. "I don't need it anymore. It's a reminder of a time I'd rather forget." Sarah nodded, understanding. She placed the bracelet in a box of items to be donated to charity. It was time to let go of the past, to embrace the future. As Emily prepared to leave for college, Sarah felt a mix of emotions of pride, sadness, and a deep sense of gratitude. They had been through a difficult journey, but they had emerged stronger, their bond unbreakable. Sarah knew that Emily would face new challenges in life, but she also knew that she had the strength, the resilience, and the wisdom to overcome them. And she knew that, no matter what, they would always have each other.